Chapter 1 of The Little Colonel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Therese. The Little Colonel by Annie Fellows Johnston. Chapter 1. It was one of the prettiest places in all Kentucky where the Little Colonel stood that morning. She was reaching up on tiptoes, her eager little face pressed close against the iron bars of the great entrance gate that led to a fine old estate known as Locust. A ragged little Scotch and Skye terrier stood on its hind feet beside her, thrusting his inquisitive nose between the bars and wagging his tousled tail in lively approval of the scene before them. They were looking down a long avenue that stretched for nearly a quarter of a mile between rows of stately old locust trees. At the far end they could see the white pillars of a large stone house gleaming through the Virginia creeper that nearly covered it. But they could not see the old colonel in his big chair on the porch behind the cool screen of vines. At that very moment he had caught the rattle of wheels along the road, and had picked up his field-glass to see who was passing. It was only a colored man jogging along in the heat and dust with a cart full of chicken coops. The colonel watched him drive up a lane that led to the back of the new hotel that had just been opened in this quiet country place. Then his glance fell on the two small strangers coming through his gate down the avenue towards him. One was the friskiest dog he had ever seen in his life. The other was a child he judged to be about 5 years old. Her shoes were covered with dust, and her white sunbonnet had slipped off and was hanging over her shoulders. A bunch of wild flowers she had gathered on the way hung limp and faded in her little warm hand. Her soft light hair was cut as short as a boy's. There was something strangely familiar about the child, especially in the erect, graceful way she walked. Old Colonel Lloyd was puzzled. He had lived all his life in Lloydsboro, and this was the first time he had ever failed to recognize one of the neighbors' children. He knew every dog and horse, too, by sight, if not by name. Living so far from the public road did not limit his knowledge of what was going on in the world. A powerful field-glass brought every passing object in plain view, while he was saved all annoyance of noise and dust. "I ought to know that child as well as I know my own name," he said to himself. "But the dog is a stranger in these parts. Liveliest thing I ever set eyes on. They must have come from the hotel. Wonder what they want." He carefully wiped the lens for a better view. When he looked again he saw that they evidently had not come to visit him. They had stopped halfway down the avenue and climbed up on a rustic seat to rest. The dog sat motionless about 2 minutes, his red tongue hanging out as if he were completely exhausted. Suddenly he gave a spring and bounded away through the tall blue grass. He was back again in a moment with a stick in his mouth. Standing up with his forepaws in the lap of his little mistress, he looked so wistfully into her face that she could not refuse his invitation for a romp. The colonel chuckled as they went tumbling about in the grass to find the stick which the child repeatedly tossed away. He hitched his chair along to the other end of the porch as they kept getting farther away from the avenue. It had been many a long year since those old locust trees had seen a sight like that. Children never played any more under their dignified shadows. Time had been, but they only whispered this among themselves on rare spring days like this, when the little feet chased each other up and down the long walk as much at home as the pewees in the beeches. Suddenly the little maid stood up straight and began to sniff the air, as if some delicious odor had blown across the lawn. "Fritz!" she exclaimed in delight. "I 'mell strawberries." The colonel, who could not hear the remark, wondered at the abrupt pause in the game. He understood it, however, when he saw them wading through the tall grass straight to his strawberry bed. It was the pride of his heart and the finest for miles around. The first berries of the season had been picked only the day before. Those that now hung temptingly red on the vines he intended to send to his next neighbor, to prove his boasted claim of always raising the finest and earliest fruit. He did not propose to have his plans spoiled by these stray guests. Laying the field-glass in its accustomed place on the little table beside his chair, he picked up his hat and strode down the walk. Colonel Lloyd's friends all said he looked like Napoleon, or rather like
Sample complete. Ready to continue?